everyone. I am MV, and today it's my pleasure to have a Yohan Lee, CEO of Scaled Entelechy. So, Johan, lovely to reconnect with you. It has been a great January. We are just talking about that. So, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to be back. And thank you so much for reaching out. I felt like when we had our initial meeting, like I just totally connected with you. And I thought this is going to be fantastic.
Amazing, amazing. No, likewise, likewise. Listen, I would love to start talking about your journey as a AI tech founder.
Yeah.
So what inspired you to start, Scaled Entelechy, and what's your vision for the company? So tell us more.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. And it's just humbling to be interviewed by such an esteemed and prestigious group. So yeah, here it goes. The inspiration obviously is machine learning and the technology is pretty incredible. It has a lot of potential and it can do a lot of things when designed and engineered in a very thoughtful way. So the inspiration was obviously seeing what the potential of what the technology could do. And I kind of survived the last AI winter, if you will, where the benefit of what we had at the time in my previous life was we had the volume of the data and the quality of the data. I came from the healthcare space where you're combining genome data at high resolution with MRI data and imaging data, along with cleaner electronic health records. And then in that kind of environment, you can actually do some pretty fantastic AI. But then when you come out of that regulated space into the larger world, it was harder. But when the advances came in the last 4 or 5 years, it was pretty clear that there was a lot that could be done. And in my world, the way that I've always thought about it was I always started with the business need first.
The last few years,
and what
we've been investing out of our family office, our own capital in this space.
And I know that goes against the grain in some spaces,
so to speak, the proverbial
because I had been
with our own capital,
involved in enough
start to see a few trends emerge.
You had the right
last
people
year,
and you had the right
when
technology,
there was sort of a dip in the capital
sustainability
markets, especially the private markets, where the capital started to dry up, interest rates went up.
Economic and investment
so we decided to spin out that strategy of how we were investing.
And so because of that,
in the exponential technologies, especially technologies at the intersection of biomedicine,
business case
into
right
a proper
from the
fund.
get-go. And
so that's how we actually launched Modi Ventures.
The business can take care of itself, and I can actually say that
was an interesting time last year.
A little bit of confidence and a little bit of validation in funding because our company is
compared to
actually
the year before.
We actually made it profitable. And
that's amazing.
And we were able to raise this fund in about a month.
Pretty much unprecedented
so
for a 2-year-old AI startup.
A great validation for us.
And so that thesis,
but that's some of the background on how it led up to that.
Being a company
one of the interesting things about our fund is that we also invest in other funds
for a smaller audience
as well
at the
as
beginning.
Direct investment. So we kind of sit right nicely
really
in
sets us up for
the middle of the venture ecosystem.
So
amazing.
Yeah, believe it or not, that was the inspiration. I just thought,
because
could I make AI?
My experience is mostly financial services, but
human honoring.
One of the things that caught my attention is that
that's
financial services are
scalable,
very
sustainable, and monetizable. And so that was kind of a thesis.
But I think if you look at the health, and that's proof that your thesis is pretty much on the right track. Because I remember when applying AI technology hypes. I think it's before generative AI,
totally fascinating, despite the fact that it's just beyond my knowledge. But
I just imagine look back 10 years ago,
the good that
and I think
be
as industry,
as a result of
we
this
get
kind
really
of
excited about the
intersection.
tech, which is understandable.
Hey,
but you're absolutely
actually,
right.
Since
the
you brought that up,
in my view, is just an
it is
enabler.
fascinating.
So you need
it's
to
almost
have like a business, let's say,
think about that we have a big data
challenge
sort of
to be
floating in
addressed
our own
first.
bodies.
Yes.
And technology is just a way
best
for you to
way,
address
and
that.
this
So I
is
think
not
I
my
really resonate
analogy,
with
but the best analogy
your
think about
approach.
this is that
one of the things that got my attention
is that what we don't have yet, and we will. This is what AI can start to enable is that we can create the Google map of
AI.
A human body. I mean, a
so
human body for individually, yours and mine.
What are some
why Google Map is
examples
that
of how your product
when
and
we look at a Google map, it has so many layers of information kind of collapsed into one.
Yeah,
so
I mean, you know,
on a particular location, you have the lowest point, which is longitude and latitude. But on top of that, you have what zip code you're in, what street you're on, what's the view of that street, are there lights there? You have the raster information, then you have the census information. All of that is on the Google map layered, but these are different modalities of data, right? 3D, 2D, sometimes text.
Some of it is unfounded.
And so you layer that up and you create this sort of what we call the Google map. And a lot of applications use it. And so I think we have a very similar thing going on in the human body, right? So you have the genomics, which is the core single cell, which has our DNA. From DNA, you have the sort of the proteins, so the genomics and the proteomics. And then you have the gut bacteria, which is the microbiomics.
Forgiveness and
all of that, it's the whole multi-omic stack. And then you have the wearable data.
If you look deep inside,
and a lot of that stuff sort of
I'm the first to admit it, right? And so
talk about the disease kind of in a similar way, but different data sets, right? So how do you actually start to even analyze this? Humans can't do it. There's no one single human that can look at all the data. This is, I think, where really the AI intersection is extremely fascinating, and the future kind of holds up. But yes, something you mentioned kind of made me realize that
how do we make our
that's probably a good way to look at that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think where
there's already concerns that it's going to take away
across many industries.
How then do we
exactly
help
what
people
you said about
reskill, upskill,
complexity
keep their jobs
of the data,
but that's
and
just
I think
table
there's a
stakes.
cultural
That's like the
aspect,
beginning.
because sometimes I see
really
people
it's how can we use this technology
in different sectors thinking
to be
at
centered on the person,
we are humans and therefore
build
we are
up
smart
the
enough
person
to deal
so
with
they
that.
can
But
reach their potential.
I think there's a limit of variables we can hold in our heads at any given time.
You know,
and
it's students who don't have access who could then one
sorry if I'm
day
probably going too deep
gain
in
the
that,
fundamental capabilities to become an astronaut, for example. Or let's say
believe that
you love
AI
writing and
is
you
a
love
fundamental,
storytelling.
let's
My
say,
friends are in the film
decision tool
industry.
For health professionals, because I have seen that in other sectors. I think it is, but I would love to hear your perspective. Making better decisions because you have better tools
that is uniquely beautiful.
Yes, look, I think health care
and
delivery is
so for me, human edifying AI. One example is
I am not
wanted to help
one example that
translation
that I like to
of
give
technical documents
is
for folks
when I was
who don't
when
have
I was in early
the
days of high
expertise
school,
and maybe having to learn
in Houston,
a technology or an
we
industrial
started to see
hardware very quickly.
proliferation of these machines called U-scan. We used to call them U-scans. Actually, that was the company that was making them.
That
basically, these are scanners next to cashiers where you can scan yourself and just leave without dealing with cashiers. They started proliferating. And I remember seeing an article here in local Houston Chronicles that the era of cashierless
for elementary and middle school children
time has come, because all these robotic machines will take over in the US. I think the prediction said something like in the next 5 years we're not going to see cashiers anymore.
English is not.
Well, guess what happened a couple decades later? Do we still have cashiers? Yes. Why is that? We have the technology to replace them, right? We have the technology to replace them. We have technology now to even be completely cashierless for a number of years now. It would make sense to even reduce the overhead, but grocery stores and retail stores don't replace cashiers because it's a high touch point. This is how you build loyalty. This is how you interact. This is a uniquely human-centric experience. I think health and healthcare delivery is actually one of those areas. I would argue that it's even more high touch point.
I saw a lot of bad AI.
This is about sometimes life and death. This is about the
how do we help
most
students
unique thing that makes us alive, and it's about that. So I think, in my opinion, there will, at least for
and so
a long while to come,
back into the fundamentals
healthcare
of the mathematics,
will be human-centric.
The applied math, the statistics.
Where we're lacking,
the new people call data science,
is there are obviously shortcomings.
Used to calling,
so I think those those functions may get replaced, or as we call it, decision support system will start to come in. A good example of what already is here is in optometry. Right? So
I think
there were times a couple of decades ago, even 10, 15 years ago, the optometry experience used to be a little bit different. The machines
I think one of the things
that are now completely automated, they give the readings out to the optometrist. Optometrist gets an entire report now. Just has to validate a few things. That wasn't the case 20 years ago. They had to figure out a few things on all of that. So the machine had also automated quite a bit of cycles. In fact,
I saw a lot of noise about how you manage consents and how you share your data.
Can see more patients.
In social media as well, I would say.
Similarly,
in healthcare,
if you look at the field of radiology,
it's something that
radiologists, not saying radiologists get replaced,
there's a lot of noise because
they're looking at.
In order to get value
contrast
from AI,
images and the MRI
you need
images,
to have good data.
And AI can really help identify areas.
I wonder,
and they can,
what's your view in terms of
really
how we
the workflow, make their decisions.
As a society, we are prepared to have this conversation
more,
because sometimes I get the impression
and make sure that we don't miss on things.
Media, but it oversimplifies
I don't think we're in
the
a time period
conversation,
where
saying
radiologists
don't give your data,
will be replaced by an algorithm.
It's a privacy
because again,
issue. But at the same time, if I want to offer you personalized products and services,
a human in the loop, as we call it,
I do need to understand.
So I think to answer your question,
your data.
I think there are especially areas where artificial intelligence and any other technology.
Do you think we're making any progress in that sense? Because sometimes I think it's still debating old issues.
Advance those areas or replace those functions.
I'm really glad that you brought that up.
That maybe you need
that goes back to our human edifying piece, right? So
and the care will always be human centric because it is that.
I think.
So those are my thoughts. There are some areas that we can double click on, but that's kind of how I think about
make a compelling vision.
No, thank you, because I think I subscribe to the same kind of way of thinking.
The rights to your data.
This more human-centric
so in our company,
view of AI. I'm just a little bit too tired from the main, let's say, headlines, where people are very pessimistic in terms of the future of AI. I think we're on the same page there. I see AI as something that will empower us.
Government started
not only in healthcare, but in other sectors.
We started with the 3 rights.
To deliver better service, to become better professionals.
The right to access your data.
From your point of view, from a venture capital perspective,
sometimes
your investments and where you see the market going.
Rectify
what are some of the most exciting, let's say, impactful trends or innovations that in the tech, bio, and health
especially when we're
space
trying to help
that you're following or eventually investing
on a U.S.
what's exciting
English proficiency exam that's required.
Well, I'll have to start with the most exciting thing that happened
then you
in the last few days.
A chance for the student
perhaps
or the parent or the teacher.
A big step for humanity is that
the student answered correctly.
The FDA and the UK government approved
for some reason there was an error.
Gene editing
the question you wrote
therapy
really should be written in a
that
different
is
way
now in human
because the way that you wrote it
and that was a big milestone, not only for gene editing world but for humanity. What that means is
that's something that we take really seriously because we know
instead
one of the areas where students from another country struggle is
binding
when they are now
to the protein that has already caused the disease and trying to just kill something.
English,
we can actually
which has
go
a different
into
meaning than the
our genome and really correct
explication of a question.
That
is super important.
Mistake in the genes, which is
and then the last one is
which is
monumental.
Google so the era of genetics medicine is here. I think it was here in R&D, but now it's actually as a therapy available for sickle cell. And sickle cell has no cure.
And that's something.
So we can actually, what that means as a sexy punchline is that we can actually edit away disease, like as if we have a word processor.
Rectify your data,
manipulating our DNA. And so I think that has to be the most exciting thing, and I've been following that for a while. And there's some more, there are further interesting things that are happening in that space.
They can literally put that into free text.
Just to talk a little bit about gene editing, the CRISPR technology that this is based on, Jennifer Doudna's work, and she got a Nobel Prize for this in 2018, I believe. But really her work, this work was already published, 14 years ago and sometime earlier. But it takes a while to prove this out in
some kind of power that they can have. Because sometimes parents will do the
and now
best
we
that
actually
they
have
can
a
for
next
their
gen
kids,
of that technology
but
called
maybe when they grow up,
base pair editing. So CRISPR technology, Cas9, that this was approved, this therapy.
So how do you allow the kids
it's almost like a scissor
retroactive capability in the future? And so
which
that's an intentional way that we've tried to get at that.
And it will replace it with something.
I think the larger question that you're asking is,
with the base pair editing, we can actually go in and precisely edit that gene.
Right? And
so it's almost like
you and I know this,
you were in the DOS world and you wrote
a lot of times
a sentence or line without a mouse, you have to go backspace.
When the general public would ask a question around privacy,
a word processor with a mouse where you don't have to do the entire line, you just go in the middle of it where the error is. So that's base pair editing. I'm actually excited to follow that space. That is still in the clinical trials.
consent versus agency are two different things. One is agreeing to something, but having very few choices beyond just a binary yes or no.
Phenomenal. I think
agency is, wow, you're giving me features.
So in terms of biggest trend, I think that is
to
the
give
most
me a
exciting
level
one.
of control
The other one
that
obviously
I
is
did not have,
where
so that
I think
I can
artificial
control the
intelligence
destiny
in
of my
medicine,
data, what you're
particularly,
collecting from me
starting to make
at any
inroads.
time.
There
And so
are
that's
areas in
something that we
oncology,
discriminate very
especially in
carefully,
medical imaging,
and we like to
in areas
make it
that I
real
think
by thinking,
where
what
we
is
can
it
really
that
augment
that
human
the
capabilities
user,
and
the
human
learner, the
capacity. I
parent,
think
the
it's
teacher
starting to be a pretty exciting
need.
space, and I think it's an investable
And
space.
if that is quote unquote at the expense of the company,
and obviously the last part
I
is
think that
I am
is part of the cost
also
of
an
doing
artificial
business.
intelligence
But
investor.
more importantly, it's
And
listening to
so
your customer
everything that's happened,
and then providing for them
especially since
something
the advent
that's
of
going to drive
transformers in the
better
last couple of
trust,
years.
value, and
So AI has
perceived
really come out of winter and into
noteworthiness of the
spring and now
company. So
summer.
I think it's an investment.
No, that's amazing. That
but
makes me
the
feel more
long-term value, I
optimistic
think,
in relation
is
to
there,
the
especially
future.
when you want to deal
There are
with
so many
retention.
negative headlines.
Yeah,
recently.
no,
I wonder
agree.
why
And
these kind
thanks,
of
by the way, for
headlines not
clarifying that,
making
because
as much noise
even in
as
my
it
mind,
should. So thanks
I
for
think
sharing that. And
the concept of consent
on that
and
aspect, on the
agency
regulatory
was pretty much
aspect too.
muddled together.
Yeah.
But I think the way you described
I
is
remember
perfect,
before
because
this milestone,
if you are
this
starting
was
a
a
business
fairly
today,
controversial
you
subject.
should think about these two things separately. It requires different skills, different tools, different investments.
With a more favorable view.
This is on the, let's say, on the user front, so on the front end of the
regulatory,
AI usage.
ethical,
One of the things I'm
social implications
hearing a
of
lot
applying,
from an
tech
industry
bio
perspective
and
is
health tech
what
to
happens
human
when you,
health and well-being.
amalgamate
So
all
why
these
do you think
data and
people
suddenly
sometimes
you have
this
these
kind of more
biases,
skeptical view,
which are
is
unintended
that
consequences
justified?
of, having large data sets. And
Yeah,
I
mean, I think
from your perspective in terms
one part
of
of this is
how to manage that, because realistically, I don't think
something,
we'll never
because in
be
the
able
era
to
of social
eliminate
media,
bias. But I think, to your point, be able to
juicy
control
punchlines make
and have
better news and
a degree of
better virality.
transparency there. And I
But I
think
think
that's
if we just take an example of, I guess,
across
gene
many
editing space and
industries.
CRISPR.
So what's your
I
view
think
in
some
terms
of the
of how to
concerns
manage bias in terms of
and fear are
managing the data
grounded,
quality,
so
but
I
at the
think
same time,
especially what
making
happened.
people
And so
aware that
I think we need to go back a little bit. 2018, I believe,
AI
was the first ever gene
might
editing
contain
conference that
bias, even
happened,
though it may
where
sound very
the
plausible and very well
CRISPR, which is a
articulated.
mechanism that is found
To
in
your
bacteria,
point about
the Cas9
how the questions
protein.
framed, how the answer is
There were about
framed.
1,000 labs
So do you think
were
that's something
experimenting
that
with
we're
that
making progress as an industry?
once it was published in
No, I think so. But I think more importantly
couple
is
decades
it's an
ago.
opportunity for
And so they
entrepreneurs.
finally had the first conference, and in that conference,
and here's where I give
all the labs around the world
serious
presented their
respect. I have
research,
a tremendous
and there was a
amount of
Chinese
respect for
scientist
marketing professionals, and
who presented that
you know,
they
the
actually
difference
took this
that
and
I've been told
edited
is the difference
an
between a
embryo or
marketing
a baby.
professional and sales professional. Is
And there was a
marketing
collective
professional
shock
starts and ends their
for
day
in
with
that room, and
analytics.
obviously
They're looking
what
at
came out of
where's
that
the segment that
is
they are
the
targeting.
sensational
Where are they
headlines that were in the
successful?
era
Where are
of
they
designer
missing?
baby.
Who is the
Everybody, the
population
babies.
that they
Now
need
everybody
to
would remember
capture
that.
for
But
market
really,
share
the
and
backdrop of that
and
was this
trust and
small
value and
sort of gene editing
and
conference with a
for
few hundred
us,
scientists,
this
and
is
that's
something
where
that we're
this
working
Chinese
on is so as for example
scientists
in
dropped the
the
ball,
English as a second
dropped
language
this sort of,
population, right?
so to speak, bomb
In Southern
on
California,
the
we have a
audience.
predominant
What happened as a consequence of that
Hispanic
is actually
population,
Chinese
so
government
Spanish-speaking origin population.
jailed him,
But then you also
and
have
he
a
spent
very
I
significant
think a number of years in jail for
Mandarin-speaking
doing that.
Chinese population.
Eventually, that baby
And
also
so
died.
what we've
Was
been
born and
doing
died.
is we've been actually
And
starting to
so,
analyze.
I think that fear of
Are we getting a higher proportion of
these sort of technologies
Mandarin-speaking
going rogue
males
or going
in
getting in the wrong
population?
hands, and the
What's our
societal
proportion of
implications
Hispanic-speaking
are there. I mean,
males
and so
versus females?
one
And
thing for
so
all of us to
as we start collecting that,
understand
we're
is that
thinking to
when this
ourselves,
technology gets sufficiently
the
advanced,
way that we could do
what are
this
some
in
of
a
the
way that's human
non-therapeutics
edifying and exciting
aspects of
is
that is we
why
need
don't
to
we
worry
start
about.
then marketing
Like,
to the
therapeutics makes a
populations
lot
we're
of
missing?
sense, right? I mean, there are so many diseases we're born with.
You know,
It's just fate.
in our initial
We
research
can now start to
on
actually
the
make sure that
Hispanic or
we are
the
not
Spanish language
beholden to
diaspora,
what we can't control. So
the
yes, we should
linguistics
turn off the
experts told us
disease
there's
and things like
essentially
that.
two major
But
branches of Spanish,
should
and
parents
from there,
have the
11
ability to
dialects
edit the
that come
genes
from it.
so that
And so Costa
our child
Rican
gets a
Spanish is
blue eyes or certain
significantly
traits?
different from
Where do we
Bolivian
stop as a
Spanish in
society? I
certain
think
word
what are
choice
some of the
components, and
non-therapeutics? How do we
then some
regulate that?
certain
I think that
syntactical and grammatical
these are important
components and
questions we should
constructs.
ask. But I think
And
to answer
so
your
we thought to
question, some
ourselves,
of
okay,
the
well,
fear
if we see greater
and
Mexican
and negative headlines. I think it's just part and parcel of any new stuff that starts to appear like
Bolivian
magic.
community center.
So that's just
like AI,
Bolivian
AI is the same thing.
Then we could try and get more of the students that are underrepresented then to be in our platform. And then now our data engineering, our models can be reshaped.
Venture is very inspirational because there are many people
that is our way of saying
as a role model, as
for every instance where bias disproportionalities come up. So that's our opportunity for marketing.
Let's say the skills
and customer capture
and new representation. These are essential
what we've been doing through community centers is when we go to the community center,
trying to
one of the
follow
biggest
your
compliments
steps,
we got was, wow, you're an AI tech
look,
company.
I mean, I'm just an investor,
and you want to help
really
us,
it's about the
our
founders.
people.
They're the ones
And we say, yes,
really generating the ideas
and when we do
being
that,
very creative and, and have the
because
vision
we
to
also
execute.
are very considerate about age
My job and
differentials, right?
people like us, our job is to really partner with
the
them
high school kids
and make sure they're
that started
successful.
using our app said, oh my gosh,
in terms
this is
of
like the
providing
most beautiful
capital
app
and
ever written for somebody
resources
like
and
me.
everything else. So
And
it's
then
really about
we
them.
also took
But I think
it to
it
the
maybe
moms and the
a little
grandmothers.
bit useful to define what tech bio
Some of
really
them,
is
it was the first
versus,
time that
say,
they've
biotech.
been actually
and I think
using
this
a
term
web app.
is
And
not
so,
as mainstream, but it is sort of starting to become
brought up how do we do accessibility better?
And so typically
how do
when
we
you think of biotech,
clearer
biotech
font
has
and
been
contrast, because of
I think
visibility and acuity issues.
Some people would say that the era of biotechnology really started with
this is beautiful.
Genentech,
and
where we could use the recombinant DNA, and we could now start to create
we just got
insulin and
word
things in the lab.
yesterday or 2 days ago that
and so,
a group of 20
since that time, the biotech has been about
mothers and grandmothers
discovering
want to use our app now.
Molecules or small molecules or
well,
something similar.
That's really
Yeah,
it's about single asset.
That to me,
it's about
that's
this, what we call the business of $1 billion molecule.
And
you can find
they
one,
wanted
you can target a particular disease,
and they wanted expressions
you go through
around
14 years of life cycles
retail
on
business
average
components.
From the time you discover something and then
businesses.
you're going into
so
the
they
animal
wanted
models,
they want
the
vocabulary
human
around
testing and
revenue, profit, tax,
sort of
fees,
the entire sort of
nature,
life
which,
cycle
again,
and the
we
capital and the
initially train our
resources is
models
all
on.
about
But
a single
now it's
molecule
an
or a
opportunity
single
for us to
asset.
do that, and now we have access
So that's
to
typically your
a
biotech
user population
life cycle from an investment
segment we never
perspective, but
had
also
before.
from
amazing.
scientific
Well, that's
perspective and company perspective.
humanifying AI in practice.
And
yeah.
I love that. And
large pharmaceutical companies will have these programs, right? That they will have multiple
That's
assets.
super
They're advancing, but
inspiring,
they're sufficiently large.
Thinking about how AI can really make a difference,
but
like in
a small
practical
biotech
terms.
company typically is
Sometimes
about a
I think
asset.
we focus too much on
they're advancing that in hopes that
behind, which is
either
also
they will
wonderful,
take it to
but
market or get
I think
scooped
having
up
this
by a
human
large pharma
impact
company,
is super important.
Now,
and
tech bio
thinking
is
about
actually
your
sort of in some senses
your journey
as
a
technology
CEO,
enabled bio.
I'm thinking
really short for
on
tech
the
bio.
community
In
watching
there,
us.
You're really
about,
trying to bring the engineering principle
resiliency
and
and
technological
fundraising and
advances
going
to the
through all
field
the
of bio and
challenges
medicine.
of starting a company. So
And one of the
you have raised funds
one of the most
from,
prominent examples of tech
various
bio field
sources,
is
maybe
AI
investors,
drug
venture
discovery.
cap.
Drug discovery has been quite a manual process.
Some of the, let's say, best practices.
An entire PhD or postdoctorate is focused on finding
fundraising,
one or two hits.
As I
we can now do that under
a week
or two and find hundreds of hits.
So in our
machine
case,
learning and artificial intelligence. And
we had customers lined up,
and those companies are not about single asset, but they're really about platforms. Because you have a platform to discover many things,
we had to
have
convince
multiple
ourselves
programs.
that is this a
so you're not
business?
really just
do we actually have
an asset company, you're a technology company.
We started
by
lining up our
Moderna.
customers first.
In fact, if you look at Moderna's
customer
growth since 2010 when they came out,
where we knew that
they never said they were a biotech company.
And we
said
they're
an mRNA
we were planning on launching
technology platform
with these kinds of products,
mRNA
these
is
kinds
a delivery.
mRNA these kinds of things that you need. And
to target
of
mRNA,
course,
and
that's a conversation.
Instruct
they tell us, well, there's actually this and this and this
do
in this
something.
use case. And so that basically
as a platform,
they can target many different and invalidated some of our initial thoughts. So we started with collecting customers first, and
they were also targeting designer vaccines,
even discuss like notional contracts.
These are all platforms
early on before we even launched. So that's kind of like a
And
kind of like a pro tip.
You'd ask, like,
it got us a fair amount of, we actually closed our
space?
first commercial contract within 4 months of opening the business.
Over the last 4 or 5 years,
and then we got our next government contract 6 months after that. And so
some things have worked, some things haven't worked.
We knew the larger
we have
dollars,
a good framework of that.
To give us the runway were going to come from businesses.
Became decacorns as well in this space.
Regular dollars that were going to be smaller, but then over time,
through AI.
We knew it was going to come from government customers.
Those
and then we knew that the larger scale
either failed in phase 1 or phase 2.
But then the higher customization was going to come from the consumer side of the house. And so we sequenced it in that way. B2B, B2G,
so one of the lessons learned was that it's not enough to just discover hits, from there, call it.
Yes, we went with angel investors first, because we knew that there were folks
important to understand what's the biology
may not be wanting to participate in certain venture rounds, or already were participating in venture rounds and kind of still got burned from Bitcoin
because we never understood the biology
some
and
other investments, some early things that kind of.
So, anyways, that's kind of the landscape of tech bio.
We knew that
tech bio, one other area of tech bio is also
one of the benefits we had was we were a pure AI
into medicine.
We had the bona fides. 80% of our staff platforms that can the remaining 20% all have a master's degree in a technical discipline that allowed us to have the real capability. Then the other part to that was
one of the things
from an angel investors, the venture side of the house, that was challenging, I'll be honest. Like the venture side fundraising wanted too much with too little, and it was hard. It was challenging.
Let's say,
we actually got better traction with smaller organizations and boutique funds and even family offices.
In terms of what we have seen during
those
the
offices, because
I think Moderna probably was
had a different set of
in terms of
didn't want
the vaccine research to make that
some of the same things that the larger venture.
But when you think about the broad spectrum of diseases,
they were more
health problems
available for cash calls. They opened up their networks of other customers.
We will accelerate that. So make
we haven't had to do a lot of
advertising,
and we haven't actually
much quicker,
zero
but at the
advertising.
same time,
and we haven't had to spend a lot of money on customer acquisition costs.
Let's say traditional construct,
the traditional commercial aspect of the next customer,
business,
one VC or
sometimes I'm under the impression these two things conflict with each other.
That's how we raise money.
It's almost like you hold back the cure
to raise money.
Sell all the medicines you have, and that's a kind of very old school.
There were organizations that felt
what's your view on that?
They were going to miss out on
the tech
AI
is great, and we are very positive. But
it was companies and organizations that had real businesses and real business problems for 20 years, 30 years.
Redefine value
and
beyond the monetary.
Once we started serving them, they said, "Look, this is great.
Yes,
we want to invest now."
I think what you're really asking is
some of our investors were actually our
ultimately,
customers.
unfortunately, everything comes down to business
we're now at a
incentives.
point now where our monthly revenue
and the business
our monthly
incentives,
costs, and so
I think post-COVID have started to change.
Again,
there's
none of it was easy. All of it was
fundamental,
hard, but we were fortunate to have
understanding
really great customers
and also
really great
understanding
investors.
of what are some of the unmet needs and how we can get there.
Very
yes, Moderna I think was an outlier. But it also highlighted that we can move fast, and we can execute in parallel if we can put the right resources and attention towards something.
We talked to a couple of brokerage houses, and
Moderna's technology of
4 years ago, they said, "You guys would have raised like 20 million by now, easily."
That they were experimenting with for a number of years before that. But to take that and sort of target the COVID virus, that architecture of the vaccine was actually just developed under a few hours.
Started in the same negative climate,
right? And one
product,
and one of the enabling factor of that was artificial intelligence.
And so Airbnb is a big inspiration to us.
Approaches and
they started out in a downturn.
And so,
and look at them now.
And how did you advance that?
Yeah, that's a very good example.
Humans very quickly was
now,
this
you're
idea
talking about
of parallel
growth
trials.
and investment.
And yes, I understand that it was an emergency situation,
but
there are lessons to be learned from that. We may not need to think about clinical trials, which is the most
you need people in AI with
for
very
a drug to come to
specific
market.
skills.
We can start to think about
so
things
tell us more about
a little bit differently
talent,
because we're now in digital
attraction, talent, retention strategy. Something that
can start to think about
someone who's starting
to
follow your kind of path.
You can actually distribute some of the clinical trials using these sort of almost
for us,
like a digital infrastructure, we
we
can
knew that
connect
if
with
we had a
patients in their
smaller
homes. You can
team
send things.
of
This
more
is
higher qualified and senior experts
so I think the
who
decentralized
got
clinical
their hands
trials
dirty, who knew how to do the work and had the
and
fundamentals,
speeding up clinical
we could
trials,
train
especially
junior staff who may be
when the
coming
human
fresh
trials
into the
begin. Before
market
that, what we call the
with more
preclinical
familiarity
data,
with
which
new
comes from
tools, but
animal
maybe
models,
less
right? We have to test it.
familiarity with
And
getting the
and
accuracy
FDA's
and the precision and
Modernization Act
recall to a
of
point
2.0 actually
where
says
a
that
company will
we need to get
demand
away
for
from animal
acceptance,
models
right?
and animal testing,
And
which
so,
is sort of cool. And
fortunately,
so
we
this is
had a
again
number of
where
senior experts
digital
that
twins and in
have been
silico
doing
sort
AI
of
and machine learning
softwares
for a
and
long
AI,
time.
and they can help sort of
We wouldn't
create
have
these
started if we didn't believe we could
simulations
do it.
of how it would
And
react
proof was
on
in the
animal
pudding.
models.
Like
So that's
when we
one area.
started
You have
out
something called
with some of our
organoid
commercial
space, where
and
we can
government
actually
customers,
grow
the
tissues and
sophistication
tumor
of
organoids, like
acceptance is high.
so we can actually experiment on
And
those,
so,
and so move things
you
faster. So
need
there's
to
all
be
these
able to conduct
sort
an
of pockets of
experiment,
things that are happening. We can
build
start
out the
to
right
sort of collapse.
parameters, build out the right
And
tuning,
the idea is, can we
adjust,
take
and then
this
be able
long
to,
cycle, life cycle, to bring a
deliver
drug out to market?
to a high
Maybe we can
requirement,
shorten
and that's
it.
hard.
And I think
There's
we'll
no way
see
around
that.
that. You
How
can
fast we
deliver
see
or
it,
not, and that part's
I think it's
binary.
anybody's guess.
It's
But we'll
good
start to
enough
see
or
those
not.
impacts. I think
Yeah.
this is where
For those,
startups
it was
in
challenging.
tech bio
At the same
particularly are
time,
very,
it was
very important,
also
because they're
encouraging,
bringing that
once we
engineering
got
first
that inflection
mentality,
point,
they're
where we
bringing
got that
technology
convergence,
first
where we got
mentality
those numbers
into this
and
space,
you
and
saw
they're really saying,
people
okay, look, we see a
actually
gap here.
delighted
So, for
by the
example, AI
results,
drug discovery
we
saw
showed
a
that,
gap
okay,
that it
we
took
can do this.
on average
This is
4 or
this
5
proof of
years to
concept
just
is
find
there.
hits.
One of our
We
government
reduced that to,
customers who was
maybe a month.
really,
But
hard to
in the clinical
please,
trial
actually
space,
said
there are
at the
startups
end
that
of
are
our final
looking that,
demo,
hey, this is a
wow,
long period of time. How do we
this
start
is
to manage
amazing.
patients
Like,
better? How do we start to
we did
predict
not expect
toxicity
that
better?
level of
So these are some of the areas
We
I
were
think
expecting them to
the way
say,
we can do this.
okay,
The last
this
part
is good
is the
enough.
biotech
It mean,
industry itself,
it
big
hits
pharmas
the
and
check
all.
boxes,
I think
but
they're
don't
starting
expect
to
us
also realize
to
that
do this for the future. But
they need to
the
build out certain
opposite was true. They
capabilities,
said,
including
this is
artificial
amazing.
intelligence.
We didn't think
And
you
so
could pull it off. The fact
there
that
are
you did
partnerships
tells
with
us
these
that
tech
you're the
bio
real
companies
deal.
that they
We're
partner
looking
up
forward
with
to
by either picking up the
a
assets
larger
they're
project.
founding in
And
terms
so,
of upfronts and royalties and all.
that's hard.
But
Now,
in some sense,
that's
you
a
are right. I
technical-
think I'm not sure we're
Let's
going
talk
to get
about the
away
business
from
side of that same
the idea
equation.
that
The government almost
which
shut down.
drugs come to market
Congress was out,
still
and
going
then
to
money
be
got pushed back, and so
based
we actually
on,
didn't get paid by that
financials
customer
and business
again for
incentives
another like 6-8
and
months.
reimbursements.
Oh
and
my
everything
God.
else. So
Right,
I don't
and
know
so,
how fast
and that's where the
disrupt
investment
that
money
model.
was
I'm
so
not sure.
important. It
Yeah,
allowed us
yeah,
to stay
no,
afloat.
thanks
We
for
had to
that.
cut down on other
and,
indirect costs and
so
everything. It forced
from
us to
an
get
investor
leaner.
perspective, I'm just
And then,
thinking in terms of
however many months
2024,
later, we got our next
2025,
customer and our next project.
most
And then
of
at the
the
same time, we
macroeconomic
launched
indicators we
3
see,
new
are
apps
painting a very
within that
negative
same
picture
period. And
of
so,
the next year.
when we weren't
And I think if you're starting
building
a business in the
something
tech
that
bio
a
space,
specific customer wanted,
I'm
we were
assuming one
busy
of
at
the key
night
skills you
building
need to
our
demonstrate
products.
is resilience.
And now our
and
products
tenacity.
are getting traction. And so
if
it's
you could
always
give,
curves that go up and down and
an
overlap on top of
advice
each
for
other. You have to,
entrepreneurs
you can't be
thinking about
afraid of
entering
that. You just
sector
have to
and
expect that.
raise
And that's,
investment and everything.
we call those Tuesdays.
So what's your perspective for next year, and what are the, let's say, the key skills
thanks
to,
for sharing. I think
to
it's
thrive,
an inspiring story.
in the next,
I love your journey and
uncertainty
the
volatility
insights
we see.
you shared with us. And I
Right.
would love maybe to close on a more
capital's
personal side. And
sometimes hard to come by.
like everything
that
we're
is true.
talking about here, and I appreciate is all time
Venture funds are
right?
also
even
having
more
hard
now
time
where
closing funds.
we are
And so
inundated by data.
so the capital is
we can spend
limited,
hours
but
and hours
capital
of
is
our
also available
daily
at the same
lives
time. If you look at
working. And
artificial intelligence exuberance, there's
curious to
a
understand
lot of
how
money
you
there.
how you balance your
Yours,
professional and
especially some
personal
of the
commitments.
infrastructure
So
companies
you mentioned last
in
time we
AI who are
spoke
really
about
building
your
these
work
large
in the
language models.
Presbyterian Church in Silicon Valley.
Seed rounds are
And-
$100 million.
and
So
to
in
me,
some
that was
sense,
super
you might
interesting
say that
because
there's money
sometimes
available, but
we forget about
for
these
vast majority
more
of the folks,
spiritual
money is hard to
side
come by
of
at the
things
moment.
that
I
are
think
as
the
important or even
squeeze
more
will
important
continue a
than
bit
what we do on a daily life.
until
So
until at
tell
least
us
in the
more
United States we
about
start to
this
get
kind of balance, and is that
Yeah.
difficult
get
to
normalized
achieve?
on this idea that
Yeah.
interest rates
It's hard,
are here to
but
stay,
you,
and
again,
we'll adjust accordingly.
the
So
thing
I
I would
think
recommend for
regardless
founders,
of tech
other
bio or
entrepreneurs, and none of
biotech
this stuff,
or
which practitioners
any
in data
industry, I
science
think
and machine
any
learning
startup
and practitioners in
has
marketing and
to
BD
really
and
be in a
capture is
survival mode
you
on
have to be forgiving of yourself too.
how they
You know,
manage
you
their
can
sort
set
of
deadlines, you can
cash
set
flow, how
goals,
they are
and then by
planning
8 o'clock that
to
night,
have
you've
plan A,
accomplished none
plan
of
B,
them.
plan C in
You're
terms
not, it's
of
not that you're not working,
extending
but
that
as
runway.
you know,
I think it's very important for,
do what you're supposed to do,
especially
and then
if a
three more
startup
things
is
come up.
venture backed,
Two of them may
to
be
work with their
opportunities, one
existing
may be a
investors
fire.
to really
On another day, three of them may be fires, and then
help
five of them may
understand
be,
what's the
opportunities, and
possibility
some of it's
of
just
sort
business
of
as usual.
raising the
And
next
I
rounds
look
and
forward
things
to
like
the
that.
business as usual days.
But I think one thing
but
remains
the
true
reality is,
regardless of the financial times,
so for me, what works, and this is just my evidence, is
that founders and startups have to really
Sundays
focus
are like church day. So I, as you mentioned,
delivering
I'm an elder
products
in
that
my
have a
church,
good
which
market,
means I
as we
show
call
up to
them,
church
product market
2
fit.
hours
If you
early.
do,
I leave church about an hour afterwards.
you will have
and then so once a month
your
on
products
Saturday
being
mornings,
utilized
3
and
hours
bought
on
or
Saturday mornings,
will have a value.
Volunteering,
But
doing church business.
if you have a
And that
solution looking for a
means
problem,
there may be somebody
I
who
think
has a
you'll
new
run into the usual problem.
disease
And I think
that
that
we need to
is
go help and minister
regardless
to.
and agnostic of financial conditions.
Somebody may have
And so I think continuously
had
to
an
go
acute
and sort of
injury, and so now
look
we need
for
to
that
bring
product
food
fit.
for them,
It's
or we
very
need to help
important, and
drive them
that's
to
what makes
appointments. And so
and
I don't always have
you
the
look
time
at
to drive people
investors
to
who are
appointments,
pre-seed
but I can
investors or
delegate and
seed
find the people who can
investors
drive
or
people to
Series A
appointments. I
investors
can
or
set
late
up
stage
the sign-up
investors.
calendar to
Everyone's
bring a
sort of
meal
looking
train
at
over for a low
a common
cholesterol
thing, which
meal,
is,
or someone who just had
this
a
product
baby.
fit for the
So it's a
market?
lot of
That's the most basic thing.
CEO
You're
administrative
sort of
responsibilities is something
analyzing.
I'm good at.
And from an
Reviewing
investment
vendor
perspective,
contracts,
especially when
I'm
you're
good
an
at
early
that.
investor like myself,
Looking at risk and
you're trying to
liability
find
contracts,
what
I'm good at that. So
these guys or this
those
founder
things,
has an
are ways that I
sort
can
of
serve my church.
unfair advantage.
And then the other things
What is
are,
it that they bring to the table? If it's early
we used
enough,
to
of
call it
course, there's no
Monday
validation.
anxiety, right?
Sometimes
When
there's no
the
validation.
pile of
Even
things
the
that
science may be
have
too
to do
early
on Monday just
in some of the
grows
cases
on your
of
head on
investments
Sunday
we've made.
night.
But
And
what is
for
the unfair
me,
advantage? Sometimes the unfair advantage is that
there's a certain
you've
point where the
validated
return
this
on
in a lab,
investment of my
or
Sunday night work
you have an interesting
just
partnership
wasn't
already
there.
with somewhere where you can actually
And what actually
you may
gave me a
have
greater return on
pilot
my
capabilities, or you
investment
have
in my
an amazing
emotional
team or the
currency and
co-founders
in
who
my
were just
attention
world-class
currency
in
and
what
in
they
my
did.
peace
And so initially it's
was
really
spending
easy.
Sunday nights
It's good to
either just
identify
reading the
what's that
Bible,
unfair advantage
praying
and
for people
what is the
in my
market
life, praying for my
that is
business. I
currently
pray for my
there, and
business, I
what
pray
would
for
you
my
expect
employees,
the
I pray for
market
my
to be.
customers all the
So as we
time.
call it, the sort of
I pray for my
the
investors,
size of the
because this
market,
one
the
investor
addressable
said it
market.
really well. He
These
said,
are very important things.
when you come in as
But
an
once you get
investor, a
started,
lot
I
of
think
people
it's
will look
really
at you as
about
one
being
of two
resilient in
things:
this time
a
period.
piggy bank
You get the
or a guru.
capital. You
And
really
at the end of
gotta
the day,
map
I'm a
out
person
where you need to
too.
be.
And
Gotta
sometimes I
focus
feel like
on
I'm being
that.
taken
I think a lot of
advantage of
times
because they just want
startups
me
do
for
get
my money.
distracted.
Or
But
sometimes
this is not
people,
one of those times, because the
think
money's
everything I
hard to come
say
by.
is
You
some
stay
kind of
focused. You got to
amazing
have plan A
wisdom
and
because
plan
they
B.
see me
It's
as some
always a
guru, but
survival mode.
I have
I think
problems
there are some
too.
of the
I have
things
a family.
that
I have, health things. I've got
been
aging
observing.
parents. It's like when you treat an
thanks,
investor like a person,
thanks
just
for
like
for
yourself,
sharing your insights
who is going through the same
and some
things,
guidance
just in a
as well
different
for
context, they appreciate
entrepreneurs
that. And so
starting their business
that's
or
an inside pro
already
tip
alongside
for
the
the
journey.
founders as you're raising money.
So here, just want to
the
say
other
thank you
part
again
is
for making the time and
just spending time with my
sharing
family.
your insights. For me,
I have
has
kids,
been,
and so
I learned a lot in this
I
conversation.
found
It
that
made me think
I could
about
plan out 4 more
how
things in my
tech, bio,
day.
and AI
But
are
if I spend that
affecting
time talking to one of my
other
kids,
industries
what's going
beyond
on
tech,
with them,
beyond
their hopes, their
healthcare.
aspirations, their dreams, the
So
things that are
thank you very
bothering
much
them, the
for
things that they're not
speaking
sure
with
about,
me,
and some new
and
insight
hope
that's
to
going
stay
on with them
connected.
at
So thank
school
you.
or at sports.
Well, thank you so
or at
much for
extracurriculars.
having me, and I hope
that actually benefits me a lot more. And
yeah, I'm sure they will. Thank
a
you.
company, and if you're an entrepreneur, you have to go in with this intent. Like, the stock market is essentially legalized professional gambling. Running a company, you have to go in with the intent that you could lose it, you could gain it, and you have to be okay with that. Because if you make the company success part of your identity success, you're asking for a failure recipe, and you're going to spend a lot of money in therapy. And it's going to detrimentally affect your health, both physically, emotionally, socially, you name it. Whereas if you remind yourself at least once a week, I could lose this company. Am I going to be okay? You got to be okay with that. And in my case, I am, because I know my value is not my company. My value is, my God, my kids, my church, my parents, my friends. That's where my value comes from, not my company. And that being said, am I still a complete responsibility freak who will do everything I can for my investors and my stakeholders, my customers and my employees? Absolutely. But I even remind my staff and my company and my customers of these same values, because 1, they need to know, and 2, then it provides a whole new level of honesty, which I think is just refreshing.
Yeah.
And refreshing usually leads to greater trust and then greater relationships, and you know, that it's just a better way to live.
Yeah, no, I agree. No, thanks for being so open and for sharing that with us. I think that's a valuable insight for someone who may be starting their business and going through the fundraising cycles. So I think it's useful to separate that time from from the professional life a little bit and be intentional about it.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that, Yohan. Much appreciated. And I felt very positive after this conversation, and I'm pretty sure everybody watching will feel the same. So thank you, for being so open and insightful. And I gained a lot from this conversation. So I would love to keep the connection open with you.
Absolutely.
And thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much. I never thought that this would be helpful to people, but I have had people reach out to me and say, hi, I'm an investor and I'm going through this, or I'm an entrepreneur and something terrible just happened in my personal life. And I realized that this is an opportunity for me to help and reach people that I never would have if it weren't for this. So yeah, I'm super grateful and I'm humbled to be part of the Rayon family.
Lovely. Thanks.